Hello and welcome to the very first Hey You Guys film show. We're here at Hey You Guys HQ and I'm joined today by Cassam, Looch, and we're going to be talking about the films coming out this week. It's quite a big week for movies. We're going to begin with Alice Through the Looking Glass, of course the sequel to Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland. What do you make of this movie? Is it as good as the first? Or as bad as the first?
Well, yeah, exactly. It is better than the first one because I really didn't like the first one. I think, again, it stars Johnny Depp in the role of the Mad Hatter. And in this one, he has more to do. So I think it's a better performance from him because I was getting sick of the whole kind of quirky, over-the-top, zany Johnny Depp character. He still does some of that, but there's a bit more to his character in this one, which I gather isn't in the book at all. So it's not in Alice Through the Looking Glass. They've taken a big deviation from that. And the other main character is played by Sacha Baron Cohen, who's not even in the books at all. So, yeah, it's quite an interesting move that they made with that.
I actually think the performances are the best aspects of this movie, which I wasn't expecting. But considering, lots of the actors are performing in front of tennis balls on sticks.
Yeah.
I thought it was quite impressive. There was quite a lot of subtlety, particularly to Helena Bonham Carter's character as well. I thought there was quite a nice emotional depth to that, perhaps. But my problem, I think, with this movie was that with the original Alice in Wonderland, there's no structure, there's no linearity to these stories. That's kind of the appeal. But at the same time, there's such a familiarity to that story. We know it so well. We know the characters. We know certain scenes from our sort of childhood that you don't need a great story because there's so many moments you can dip in and out of. But I felt that this sequel didn't quite have a strong enough story. I don't think it had enough of a kind of a sort of narrative structure to it. And I actually thought that was to its detriment. I mean, what did you make of the story? Were the stakes high enough? I mean, Johnny Depp's character, the Mad Hatter, was just a bit glum. I mean, and then she was sort of putting everything at risk just to make him feel a bit happy. Do you think that was enough of a crux to this tale?
Well, I actually quite like the fact that we don't know the story that well, that it is going in a way that you have no idea where it's going to end up. With the first one, you've heard that story, you've seen it, you've read it so many times before, you know exactly what's going to happen. And with this one, there was various points where I wasn't sure who the villain was in a good way, and they kind of changed their motivations, and you don't know who's good and how it's going to end up. And I mean, you're right, Johnny Depp does play glum in this, but there's a fair reason for that as well. They kind of give him a good reason to be glum in this. I thought it did a good job of giving us a new story and kind of doing enough with the characters, except for Anne Hathaway's character, who has very little to do in this one. Everyone else, I think, had enough to do and had enough motivation to go through. And
obviously, James Bobbin, it's his one of his biggest movies to date. Obviously, Flight of Conchords and The Muppets was huge. He's doing Men in Black 23 next. Have you got quite high hopes for that following this? I mean, because I still think he managed to implement some of his kind of comedic sensibilities into this, even if quite subtly.
Yeah, I thought that, especially the Muppets films, there were some bits in there that will work really well with that universe. Well, it's two universes, I guess, colliding. It's just whether we want to see another 23 Jump Street, even because the end credits of the last one kind of made that joke very apparent. And I suppose a crossover film is the only way you can do it now. It kind of adds a little bit of interest to it. But yeah, is that enough of Channing and Jonah Hill together? I don't know.
And one problem I had with Alice Through the Looking Glass, even though I admired it, especially visually, the kind of aesthetic was quite kind of breathtaking, was that in the trailer there was the sequence with Andrew Scott's character where she was put into an institution and he sort of cited female hysteria as the kind of the reason why she was there. And I thought that was a really interesting take. That had that kind of feminist angle in a kind of Disney blockbuster was quite interesting. But that made up, 3 or 4 minutes of the movie?
If you're going in as an Andrew Scott fan, you're probably going to leave slightly disappointed because he's not in it that much. They play with that idea of the female character towards the start of it when she's a sea captain and she's coming back and she's trying to keep her job and she meets obstructions at every turn. But you're right, they could have made more of that, and the way they did it in the trailer isn't exactly how they play through it in the movie.
And obviously also out this week is Love and Friendship. I think that we're both unanimously more decided that this is a really great film. I mean, you really loved this movie, didn't you? What was it about this Whit Stillman film that you found so special?
I mean, it stars Kate Beckinsale, who's had kind of a mixed career in Hollywood. This is her best performance to date, I think. She's fantastic in this. It's a lesser-known Jane Austen story. And again, I think that helps it because you don't really know which way it's going to go. You don't know where this character is going to take the story. And she's not exactly the nicest person to her friends, let alone in terms of the story and her own daughter as well. But there's still a charm about her, and Kate Beckinsale's really, really good in this role. And yeah, I just thought it's not an offensive film in any way. There's just a nice feeling watching it, but there's some clever turns in it. And it avoids being very kind of lovey-centric as well. It's got some big heavyweight British actors in it, but they all kind of play with the idea. And I think partly to do with the direction as well by Whit Stillman.
Yeah, I really want to read the novella Lady Susan now. It's really intrigued me into that. But I felt that because Whit Stillman's previous film, Damsels in Distress, I felt was a little bit contrived in its whimsicality and its quirkiness, and it didn't really do it for me. But I actually think this film manages to be quite kind of creative, particularly in the way each character is introduced. I think their name comes up on the screen and they almost sort of pose for a picture almost. It's that kind of something quite resourceful about the way he's presented it, but it never feels forced in any way.
Yeah, and they do that in the end credits as well, don't they? Where you kind of see a little bit of each character in that kind of role. It looks like a very standard period film, but there are some really good touches in it that keep it quite modern. You're right, Damsels in Distress was a very mumblecore film, and I think, I'm completely done with that genre. Probably way before that film anyway. So, and this could have kind of veered into that, but it just keeps it really light and fresh. It's just one of the most fun films I've seen. It's fun to watch, and it just feels like they had fun making it as well.
And if you're like me and you have felt you've got a little bit sort of bored of the period drama, you maybe perhaps think it's a bit tedious, this is definitely worth seeing. This is really fun and very contemporary as well, I found. Talking of contemporary, tapping into pertinent themes, Money Monster is out. So the idea behind Money Monster, directed by Jodie Foster, is that George Clooney plays a TV presenter who's a sort of works on a financial channel, and Jack O'Connell takes him hostage on air to prove a point and to make a kind of a sort of quite broad political statement. And even though the film is ridiculously good fun, I think that my problem with this movie is that you have to, because it taps into such real themes, it's kind of using the economic kind of crash as a kind of crux for the tale to sort of to thrive off of. I felt that when you're dealing with realism and a story that's got quite a few plot holes, and if you actually think about it, it's quite absurd, it would never actually play out in the way it does. I find the two sort of struggle to be quite compatible with the other. I feel like it almost should have been more ridiculous or more real, and I don't know if it quite balanced the two. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. Because the first part of it is very much like a hostage drama in a very confined space, and they do a good job of that. All the performances are really good in that. Jack O'Connell does a great job. George Clooney, he's playing an extension of himself, the kind of, the larger-than-life character that we see in some of his films, and that we assume he is in person as well. So he's playing that charming guy with a bit of an edge. But they're quite good together in that very small space, and George Clooney's got Julia Roberts in his ear basically giving him advice, and that all works really well. And that is the bit that feels quite real. But you're right, the minute it gets beyond that, and then they've got this fraud plot playing along a side story, and that kind of you're right. It just feels like if you're going to have something serious, then you should stick to that, rather than throwing in this fantastical element. And you have people watching it. It's kind of like The Truman Show, people watching it back at home and cheering and applauding it. That's never going to happen. No one's going to watch it for that long, and no one's going to be like supporting one character as opposed to the other. There's some plot holes with the way the police act, because it's just like completely ridiculous, and the way the media react as well. There are quite a few plot holes, and then when they leave that space in the second half of the film, I think it loses even more momentum, because then it just becomes a kind of chase thriller on the streets of New York. And you just think, this isn't how it would really play out.
And I love how you always see this in Hollywood movies. You have loads of people in the bar just watching the financial channel and all going, oh my God. We were just missing a guy in the bath. There's always a guy in the bath with a little TV at the end of it, I usually find. But Julia Roberts, I thought, was the best thing about this. Now, she was in the Secret in Their Eyes remake earlier this year, which was not very good. But she was the best thing about that as well. I mean, are we seeing a little bit of a comeback for her? Because she's two down this year and two pretty impressive performances.
The performance in Secret in Their Eyes was fantastic, especially towards the start of that film. And you're right, she's really, really good in this. It depends. I mean, if she's going to do these sort of roles now, then that's great. I don't know how many of these roles come along. This is directed by Jodie Foster, so I think that helps in terms of having a strong female character on screen with a really good female director as well. It's a fine film. I think if you want to see something that talks about the financial crisis, then you watch The Big Short. If you want to see an entertaining film kind of around the same subject, then you can watch this one.
Yeah, and I thought that, talking of sort of strong performances, Jack O'Connell, who I'm a huge fan of, I think we all are over here.
Yeah.
He's really making his move into Hollywood quite successfully. Of course, it was Unbroken. He was fantastic in that, and the film was, not great, but he was the best thing about it. And as soon as you could see he was sort of cast as an unhinged kind of character, you sort of knew this could be a role for him, and I think he really pulls it out of the bag.
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't seen him do anything else, though. He's played those kind of guys in extreme situations and kind of angry young men. He's one of the guys who people have talked about possibly being the next James Bond, and I just can't picture him in a tuxedo doing something quite suave and sophisticated. But in this role, it's perfect for him.
And of course, also they're the sort of 3 big releases out this week, but we've got some other films definitely worth kind of keeping your eye on. There's the Australian drama The Daughter with Sam Neill and Geoffrey Rush, which is a really interesting kind of sort of quite intimate family dynamic piece, which is definitely worth catching. And there's Mon Roi, the French drama with Vincent Cassell and Emmanuelle Bercot by May Wen, the director. And this, I think, Emmanuelle Bercot actually she shared the top Best Actress Award at Cannes last year with Rooney Mara for Carol, which I think is a high commendation. And then also out this week we have The Trust. I'm a big fan of The Trust. I'm not quite sure what the general
Tell him who stars in it.
is.
Tell him who stars in it.
It's Nicolas Cage and Elijah Wood. Now, I'm all over the posters on the Underground. Nicolas Cage back to his best. If you see that and you think, what idiot said that? I'm the idiot.
Right, okay.
But it's really tongue-in-cheek.
Back to his best from Wicker Man? Or...
Back to his best from Wicker Man,
All right,
of course.
Okay.
I felt, I mean, to be fair, when you said back to his best, it's the first to get a theatrical release in about 2 years,
Right.
which is always a good start. But the reason I liked The Trust was I felt that it was very tongue-in-cheek. And you could go in and think that was ridiculous, I didn't like it. But I think the director is knowingly ridiculous the whole way through. And it's got a real Coen Brothers feel to it. That it kind of thrived off the notion of it was all supposed to be easy, so all supposed to be so easy. And that kind of Fargo, we've got this idea, straightforward, and obviously everything falls apart. And I really like that for it. And also out is Bobby, the documentary about Bobby Moore, which is an interesting take on his life, but it focuses a little bit too primarily on things we know.
Right.
Because we've seen, I mean, they even debate whether the ball crossed the line in the 66 final.
Right.
We've seen
It definitely did.
It definitely did, of course it did. We've seen that countless times, but I want to know about what happened to Bobby Moore after his career, because he became this kind of quite elusive presence. I think my dad has this story where he was on Edgware Road, and it was in the late 80s, and he walked into a sort of Pizza Hut, and Bobby Moore was just sat there in a corner on his own having a pizza, and you think, that's the former England captain. Yeah. How did this happen? How did he just become this kind of...
So did they talk about kind of the difference in financial situations as well from players back then who...
It touches upon that. I think that my issue with this film is that it just covers perhaps ground we've covered before. But yeah, that is briefly touched upon, the kind of difference in celebrity culture and particularly in football from the 60s to the present day. But it's also an interesting film. It's by Ron Scalpello, who's... I think this is one of his first kind of documentaries. He's definitely worth watching. So there's a lot out this week. I think we're getting back into the kind of the summer months. We've gone through that post-award season kind of dip, haven't we? And it's getting good again. So if you head to HeyUGuys.com, you can read the reviews and check out the interviews for the films we've discussed today. And if you'd like to watch more of this show, subscribe here, and we'll see you next time.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.
Hey